That is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening.